How's everybody doing today? If you're enjoying the FutureNet Asia conference, this is my first time here. I usually invite this gentleman right here on our sessions. This is the first time he's introducing me, so I appreciate that. Okay, so we're going to get started right away on the fireside chat because we only have about 20 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce the speakers now. First up is Udai Kanukolanu. He's Chief Revenue Officer with Rakuten Symphony. So Udai, come on up. And next up is Kang Wei. He's head of technology strategy and architecture, that at CelcomDigi. And Kang Wei, welcome. All right, let me go ahead and get seated. So clearly the title today is Telco, Techco, and how we see everything as a service. So we'll be talking about that. I'll break out my glasses here. Last year I didn't need these glasses. Tells my age. Udai, I'm going to start with you if you don't mind. Let's start really kind of setting the stage for the discussion and talk about the definition of what a techco is and really through the optics of the trends that we're seeing right now sort of globally.
Now, first off, props to you for almost not murdering my last name. That's the first. But look, I mean, I've had the privilege of kind of being on both sides of this equation, right? Spent a couple of decades on telcos. The last half a decade, I'd say, more in technology companies. And I think it kind of fundamentally comes down to one thing, right? It's, techcos really run their business on technology. And then a non-techco, and I don't want to put telcos all in one bracket because telcos are across the spectrum when it comes to this definition. The non-techcos generally are businesses run on humans, with technology being a part piece of the overall equation. And I think this perspective becomes extremely relevant now when you think about the technology trends. One, you're starting to kind of see machines progress from being able to automate to being able to make decisions. That is a massive, massive shift in terms of the capabilities of machines. Then what you're starting to see, obviously, and I don't want to keep throwing AI, but the explosion of AI software, the software frameworks, just in terms of their capabilities, their availability, and the massive change they're starting to cause, right? So when you start to kind of put that context together where machines now are significantly more sophisticated, and you start to think about the techco who's already running on machines, you start to kind of see how they're already positioned to kind of really take advantage of this next inflection point. So when we in the industry sit down and have this conversation, I think it's really apt. I mean, like, a lot of us are still kind of struggling with this concept of why do I need to transform? What is there for me? It's been a pretty well said thing for me. Why do I need to go become this new thing, right? But I think when you start to put it under that context of things, I don't think we have an option. I mean, the gap is only going to be bigger if you don't get on this, right? So, and that's kind of really where and how I see the basic definition of techco.
Kang Wei, anything to piggyback on?
Yeah, so coming from an operator perspective, revenue in connectivity is softening today. We're getting a lot of pressures on margin. And today we hear a lot about network APIs. So I think that's where we'll need to look into new sources of monetization beyond the voice, beyond SMS, and also beyond selling gigs and gigs of data, just besides leveraging on the technology that we actually have today.
So again, the title of the session is Telco to Techco, and how to see everything as a service. Kang Wei, I'm going to stick with you here. Of course, Web 2.0 back in the day was a sea change. We recognized that at the time. We recognized that forthwith. Are we seeing the same sea change as we talk about telco to techco, and why is it significant to talk about that?
Yeah. So for telco, we are a capital-intensive industry. So we spend millions, if not billions, pouring into infrastructure. So the yield, or rather the return ROIC is actually coming down. Revenue is softening, as I mentioned. We're getting a lot of pressures on margin. Competition is also coming up. So you can't compete based on prices. You can't also offer the same thing that we've been offering to the masses, to customers for the past, 10, 20, or maybe even 30 years. So we need to look into new revenue and also how do we actually monetize our network. So network API is one of it. We talk about providing better quality of services through network slicing. So I think these are some of the differentiation that we need to offer to the customers so that we can actually take revenue beyond the connectivity. So it's not about just revenue beyond connectivity, but also taking advantage of all these new technologies like cloud, AI, and monetizing them.
Udai, significance of talking about the sea change of telco to techco?
Look, I think for me, we can have numbers, and there's a lot of numbers out there in terms of what we think the CAGR is and the addressable market is. But I think, to me, what is more interesting is really how the approach is going to be. Where do they start? And to me, that's the exciting part, right? I mean, the technology, we've seen a lot of different technologies come through where we've struggled to kind of find use cases, to be honest, in this industry. How do I monetize it? What's the commercial angle for this? I think this inflection point that we're seeing is, I mean, the use cases are abundant. This is now about where do I start, right? What do I want to prioritize? How do I go about it? I think that, to me, is the more exciting part and interesting part of this transformation, where we sit today.
Udai, I'm going to stick with you here. So let's really kind of see where the rubber meets the road in the discussion. How does a company become a techco? And I know that's a really loaded question, but we're talking about maybe from the vantage point of maybe two vectors. One being, how do you break the expected CapEx, OpEx, and speed of execution? That would be one vector. And the other one would be disentangling the cost with the capability, right? Capability rises, costs rise, but how do you disentangle that? How do you reconcile those two areas?
No, absolutely. Look, I mean, to me, that is really the crux of it. You know, the two things that you're starting to come up with, right? How do we get out of this CapEx cycle? And I think there was an interesting data point that I saw. I want to say it was STL Partners that actually had the study. But it kind of shows, you know, as a percentage of revenue, a typical telco today spends about 25% of that on CapEx. And you try to compare that with what a techco does. They spend close to 25% of their revenues on R&D. So that's really what we're competing against, right? So how do you break this cycle of CapEx and start to kind of put money back towards R&D and innovation and being able to generate services, right? That, to me, is the crux of this transformation. And the other aspect, when you kind of think about it, is, like you were mentioning, how do we kind of break or disentangle the correlation between cost and capability, right? So when we kind of look at it, and like I said, I mean, Rakuten is a phenomenal example, right? I mean, they started as a technology company, right, back in '97, disrupting retail, you know, moving on to payments, moving on to insurance, moving on to, like I said, 70 plus businesses. And they have a very simple formula in terms of how they go about this. They start with, you know, looking at how do I drive cost out? And to me, that comes down to two parts. How do I simplify things, right? And simplification is not just about, you know, yes, the idea is you drive out all of the non-essentials, but how do you do that, right? It's a great concept, right? I want to simplify. I think what we inherently do is we own the end-to-end system design, right? That is our differentiation. And then that doesn't necessarily mean we develop all parts of that solution, but we do own it, which means we're very opinionated into what comes into our design, right? We're not at the behest of all of the other technology companies that bring in technology to our design. We are extremely opinionated. So that's the step one, the simplification, is owning the end-to-end system design of whatever solution it is that you're putting together. And then you bring the technology players to play a part in that, as opposed to them dictating to you what your system design is, right? So that's one part. And with that goes consolidation, right? I mean, it's any company. There's so much duplication of what we do. So if you look at these two factors of simplification and consolidation, That is the driving cost out part of this equation, right? Then you get to how do I then disentangle the capex to the cost to capability curve? That comes down to one abstraction. How do you make everything software defined? Every part of everything that we do is programmable, right? That is a fundamental building block of how we do things. And then, of course, the last part of it is then automate. Relentlessly automate. So when you combine these four things of simplification, consolidation, abstraction, and automation, and relentlessly repeat this through, is kind of where you start to get to being able to kind of, one, break the CapEx cycle, and two, then break and disentangle your capability and cost structures.
Kang Wei, the disentanglement between the capability and cost, do you have your own opinion on that, or do you agree?
Well, I wouldn't call it the breaking of them, but I think where we need to invest smarter. So one area is to invest in efficiency, and I think Udai spoke about it, simplification, remove the duplication, and also automation. So if we invest the same way how we used to invest 3 years, 5 years, 10 years ago into the monolithic, the legacy kind of architecture, that will not give us the kind of efficiency that we're looking for. So I think that's one area that we need to be very mindful about where we're spending. So it's not about spending, but it's where do we spend and how do we actually spend it much more smarter. I think the other way, the other thing that we need to be more conscious around is spending to upgrade the network or to modernize the network so that it has more capabilities. Take, for example, analytical capabilities, monetization capabilities, as I mentioned earlier on, network slicing, network API, so that actually you can expose that to many other verticals, serve the enterprise, and actually generate multiples of revenue, because let's face it, selling gigabytes or terabytes of data isn't that profitable as it is previously. So we really need alternate source of revenue, especially for the telcos.
Udai, back to you, and I'll sort of wrap with this question. As we move to virtualized networks over the last number of years, you always heard this is not a technology problem, this is a mindset problem, a people process problem as well. That doesn't apply more than ever, or it does apply more than ever to telco, to techco. How so, and can you break that down for us?
See, look, I think we've done ourselves an injustice, and I'd say every one of us in this room is probably guilty of it, right? We've had so many rally cries around, let's go digital, let's go all IP. We're now going next gen. So if you think about kind of the broader organization, we've kind of almost created a organizational fatigue when we start to talk about transformations. And I think fundamentally, the way we come about is make it a technology transformation conversation, which almost starts to tend to alienate the rest of the organization. I think the way we're going to have to start to think through this is really how do you shift the conversation from a technology transformation conversation to a economic conversation. That starts to really bring in all of the stakeholders within an organization rallying behind one set of objectives. And I think that's really where we've been challenged to date, when I kind of think through where the challenges are to kind of talk through some of these transformations.
Kang Wei, anything to add?
Yeah, so I just want to relate I started off as a radio engineer. So when we look at the base station of the future, or even today, I can't think of, I can't plan it like the way how I used to do it, because it's card-based, it's cabinet-based. So when you look at the base station of the future, we're talking about platforms, we're talking about Kubernetes, containers, microservices. We're going into terminology that RAN engineers are not very comfortable with, like cloud, hypervisors, CI/CD, CT tools, and all. So that itself brings about a lot of different technologies, tools that we as engineers need to get updated on. So that's where I think that the upskilling needs to be there, and it's really a mindset change and a culture shift, as you just mentioned.
Yeah. Udai, I wanted to ask you one more question, and we'll go to Kang Wei as well, and this is a bit off script, but I wanted to ask you this. there's an urgency and an expediency required in order to get to a techco, and the ones that act first will be successful, and there will be a number of stakeholders out there that won't be successful in doing that. How does that apply more than ever again to becoming a techco right now? Again, if you just wrap with that sentiment.
So look, I think there's a saying that stays with me when it comes to these type of conversations, right? The best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. And the second best time is today, right? And I think we kind of constantly get stuck in an incubation phase a lot of times, like, me and Kang Wei were talking about earlier, right? So how do you kind of really break through that, right? And start to kind of get to action, get to kind of really moving down the path. And I think it starts small. At the end of the day, these are not all big bang at the same time, right? So, we were having an earlier conversation. I think one of my colleagues was involved with AI native, right? So at the end of the day, these are not technology conversations like I was saying, right? So to me, these are strategic and decision-making frameworks. That is how these have to get integrated top-down, right? So it's not necessarily one piece or the other. Even when you think about what is AI native, for me, you really start to think of it this more as a decision-making framework. When you start there, and you kind of build your overall, mind share around what that framework looks like. That's when you start to make the decisions that really kind of go along progressing us to kind of where we need to get to.
Kang Wei, the urgency and expediency required right now to become a techco, to what degree does that urgency exist right now?
I think it's very, very urgent for many of us. So there's a lot of new players in the market. You can see that in the AI space hitting up very quickly. Names that you've not heard in the last, 6, 12 months, or not that big previously. So back then, we were afraid of big tech companies like Facebook or Google and all. So these days, operators like us, we're concerned and putting our radar on all this AI company. So I think where I'm coming at is that technology moves very fast, and all this technology is also accessible to us as well. I think one thing that we need to start doing is don't look back. I think that's the first thing, not to use the past as a reference. But the future is bright. The future is full of new technologies, and sometimes we should stop also to explore everything and then end up with the analysis paralysis. It's like, oh my God, there's so many technology out there. Which one should I start off? Yeah. But I think where I take guidance is that start small, experiment. And then if it doesn't work, then move on. So if it works, then scale it and roll it out in a larger and a more meaningful way.
And again, title is Telco to Techco, seeing everything as a service. I think what will happen is this is more of a business, maybe in a culture conversation, but the next couple iterations of the discussion will be around the actual services that are being provided as a Techco as opposed to a Telco. So looking forward to having that conversation. Udai, nice to meet you, by the way. We had some discussions before this discussion, so it was good for you to give us your time. And Kang Wei, very nice to meet you as well. First time doing this with you, and hopefully not the last. Yeah. I appreciate it, and thanks to everybody for listening. Appreciate it.